And welcome to another Odyssey House Journals. I'm Trip Mitchell. That is Randall Carlisle.
Hello, Trip.
We have had fun today.
We have. We've recorded, just inside information, we record a couple of these shows every other week.
Right,
So,
and today we're doing 3 because I double booked. But
yeah, but you know what? $10,000 a show for talent fees. I mean, I'm more than happy to do 10 a day.
could we do 5? You know, Alex Trebek, does he ever get a word wrong on Jeopardy? Because he did.
No, he's perfect. Or I don't know how they tape that. I mean, if there's a mistake, do they stop tape and
They
start
have to,
over
because
again?
I've never seen him make a mistake.
I know. Well, maybe he never makes a mistake.
Did you ever make a mistake?
I made mistakes, but not very many. At the radio station, the big radio station I worked at years ago, they had we were owned by RKO at the time, and we had a bunch of AM rock stations all over the country in L.A., Boston, New York, where else? San Francisco, I can't remember. But the news guys, because we did this sensationalist 2020 news.
Sure, CKLW, I grew up with it in Windsor,
and
Ontario.
the news guys, it was a contest, and they gave away it was like a 10-day trip to some exotic island or something for the most error-free newscasts over a period of a month. So you fought like hell to just be perfect all the time so you could win this prize. So I sort of had that ingrained in me that you just don't make mistakes. Well, I never won the trip, but
My broadcasting career, I made a lot of mistakes.
well, because you were drinking a lot of the time.
But I thought I was very good.
Speaking of drinking, did you see the headline in the D News a while back? Does the United States have a drinking problem?
Let me think about that for a second.
Okay.
Yes.
And the interesting aspect, and I'll just read just a little. While opioid-related deaths dominate recent headlines, even more people died as a result of drinking alcoholic beverages over the last 2 decades. And I've seen article after article that in the U.S. every year, tons more people die of alcohol and alcohol-related illnesses than die from opioid overdoses or meth overdoses. But that's what's getting publicity right now. But alcoholism still is the biggest substance use problem in America.
And the thing about alcoholism is it could be anyone.
Could be anyone, could be you or me. Oh, which it is.
Yeah, it was. And Lee,
Lee behind the camera. I mean, there's just so many people that it affects, and it also is legal, which doesn't preclude somebody from becoming.
But in last week's show, you talked about 100 billion oxy pills being prescribed.
Right.
And that number is shocking. But
yeah, but think of how much booze is consumed every year in America. I mean, between beer and hard spirits and wine, I mean,
it's incalculable.
Millions of gallons. You know?
Oh yeah, no question.
Yeah.
So, well, let's introduce our guest this week. Alan, come on in. Alan Maxwell has been a friend of mine since I moved back here for the last
I'm sorry to hear that, Alan.
7 years.
You would claim being a friend with this guy?
Well, he claims it.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay, all right.
Well,
That's cool.
Good point. But we volunteer at the same. We do some volunteer work together, and he has come up with the worst nickname for my skiing. He calls me Wedge. We were shooting a video the first year,
I
and
don't think I was the one that came up with the name, but I've kept it alive.
Does that,
Yeah,
mean,
you've kept
does that mean you're going down the hill like this all the time?
Yeah.
it was one aberrant
No
turn.
parallel turn?
It was one turn that
one
went
aberrant
horribly
turn.
wrong. And but we've known each other for a lot of years, and Alan, you have talked about your story very openly. And that's why we wanted to have you on the show, because we get a chance to meet some incredible people who've gone through a lot, and no one's addiction is ever the same, and no one's recovery. And the reason we want to meet people like you is to get a chance for viewers at home to realize that their situation, while it might seem very lonely, very isolated right now, there's a lot of help out there. And every story is different, and we learn a lot. So,
And you're certainly not alone if you are sitting at home with that problem. I mean,
yeah,
you know.
and our numbers are indicating that. So tell me about how you started with alcohol and drugs. And
Oh, wow. I mean, the first time that I tasted the magic, I was probably about 10 years old. My cousin and I, we started sniffing glue and drinking. You know, we were stealing whiskey, little mini bottles of whiskey from my uncle, and a 16-ounce Budweiser the first time we did that, and a tube of glue and a plastic bag. We went up in the woods and got really loaded and And
How'd you know to do glue?
I don't remember. It was just.
That's because you did glue.
It was probably my cousin's fault, at the time. But I'll throw him under the bus. But what I do remember is profoundly the feeling that I got from it. But I remember walking down the street. This was back in Connecticut, and I can still to this day remember just walking down the street and this feeling of euphoria, and loved it. Mm-hmm. The absolute next opportunity I got to drink, I did. My mom and stepdad and sister all went out to dinner, and I found a reason to stay home because I had planned on raiding the liquor cabinet. My mom drank fairly heavily. There was lots of stores available, and I drank a little bit of everything. And
You were sampling.
there was, yeah. And I can remember bits and pieces of the evening. I can remember trying to put myself in the dryer and turn it on, but I couldn't figure out how to get that to work, luckily.
You needed a second person there to turn
Yeah,
it on.
and
while
I
you were in
did,
there.
yeah.
I needed my
Yeah.
sister to be home or something, but she would have been happy to do it. But it just seemed like it would be a good idea. My thinking about what would be a good idea is always suspect.
Yeah, when you first get into recovery, by the way, they tell you if you have a thought, do the opposite.
Call your your mentor or whatever and tell them, because they need a good laugh. But what was significant about that night is that I drank to excess, I drank for effect, and I had never experienced anything quite like that before at that level. Went to bed, and when you're 10 years old and it's the first time you really got that drunk, you don't have the information that you learn over time. I didn't know to put one foot on the floor when the bed started spinning. And so I got sick to my stomach, and I can still remember distinctly sitting in the bathroom and throwing up, getting sick, sign of alcohol poisoning, but I didn't know. Well, my sister ratted me out, called my mom, and because she thought I was dying. Mom thought I had probably poisoned myself with medications or something, and was like pleading with me to tell her what I had done. And she's holding me over the toilet, and I'm throwing up, my gut dry heaving, and I'm telling her, Mom, it's okay, I know what I'm doing. And she, finally she promised to not be mad, and I told her that I had a little bit to drink. And that was kind of the story of my drinking career, was anytime anyone asked me how much did you do? Well, a little,
At a time.
a little, each swallow. But she started laughing, and she thought, well, you'll get yours in the morning. What was odd about my drinking history is that I never had a hangover. All the drinking that I did for all the years that I did it, I would feel a little rough in the morning. I didn't have a great attitude, but I never had a hangover. I had friends that they'd wake up the next morning, and I had a buddy that had a really good friend who had bleeding ulcers, and he'd wake up and throw up blood the next day, and I'd look at him and go, God, if I got that bad, I'd quit. And a little judgmental attitude,
Yeah,
right?
it is. Yeah.
But yeah, that was when and from then for the next 16 years, I drank and used as much and as often as I could, because I loved everything about it.
The transition from alcohol to drugs, was that pretty seamless?
I did it on the same day. I was sniffing glue and drinking on the same day.
Oh, so you never started, this went straight through.
It was day one all the way, and I didn't have drugs. Drugs were harder to get because alcohol, as you said before, is legal and it was readily available. My parents drank, and I was smoking cigarettes and drinking and doing whatever I could find.
Your mom didn't continue to chuckle over the fact that you were drinking
No,
so
she
much.
was mad. I came down for breakfast the next day, and she was cooking breakfast, figuring that she'd have a nice breakfast and I'd be sick as a dog. And I walked in, and I had partially remembered the evening. It was kind of brown out, I walked in and said, oh, what's for breakfast? I smelled the bacon cooking, She was so mad.
Did she know that you continued, or did you do a better job of hiding it?
I didn't really get caught. That was the one thing, I never troubled the law or anything like that over the years. I was maybe a good criminal, or I was lucky, or whatever. But the legal ramifications, I did get caught for smoking pot in high school once and got kicked out of military school. I was in military school for 2 years.
That's a tough penalty.
Well, that was Yeah, I mean, I was in military school and got caught for smoking pot in military school.
Right.
And anyway, you know, I grew up between my dad being in the military and then being a pilot, and my folks getting divorced and remarried and stuff. We moved a lot, and I was never in one place more than 2 years. So I was always the new kid in school. I was always, you know, the littlest guy with the biggest mouth, and I was fighting all the time, you know, and you know, I was lonely and different. I never fit in. So drugs and alcohol was a great way to cope with that stuff. I mean, I could drink most of the people I knew under the table, and still drive. Yeah, I'm not proud of that, but,
I was
but
going
it
to say
was
that's
true.
nothing to brag about.
Yeah,
but-
no, but I mean, and I got away with a lot of things.
Well, you matriculated to some drugs that are a little rougher on you than glue.
Yeah, well, I actually stopped sniffing the glue when I was about 12 because I started noticing short-term memory loss, and you know, it was just something that I observed and attributed it to the glue. Whether it probably was.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and around the same time I was introduced to marijuana and I started smoking that, loved it, and within the next, I mean, I didn't really progress to a lot of the other stuff. I found LSD and stuff in high school, and that was great. Found Quaaludes in high school. That was like drinking really heavily but not having the smell, so when you're in military school or in prep school, you could get away with it easier. Quaaludes were great. I never met a drug I didn't like.
Until
I've never
when?
seen Randall shake his head like that.
Well, no, I mean it's a good story, but obviously something happened at some point because you're describing everything you did that you liked it.
I enjoyed the heck out of it, right?
Okay.
And then you know, my drug of choice was more, preferably yours.
Yeah, well,
and I did that for a long time. And you know, I lived in Park City, and I was embedded in the culture up there. And I sold a lot of drugs to support my habit and whatnot. I don't know how I stayed out of jail or didn't get busted, but I did. My bottom was more of I would lean towards physical, but it really wasn't. I mean, I wasn't so impressed with the physical part of it. I was in denial about a lot of that, but it was more emotional. You know, I got into a relationship and that fell apart, and it devastated me. And you know, I came home one day and my girlfriend was hiding behind the door in my apartment. Now, I was selling a lot of cocaine and doing a lot of stuff up there. I was smoking a lot of freebase. I got to the point where, this was in June of 1989, I got to the point where I was about 6'1", 115 pounds, and pretty much half dead, you know. I felt like I was doing great. Now, I mean, that's BS, right? I really wasn't. But I had gotten to that point where I really wanted to stop and I couldn't. You know, I wouldn't have admitted that out loud, but I knew I was filled with shame about what I was doing, and I was doing everything that I had.
Were you a pretty substantial dealer in Park City?
I supported myself. I don't know. I moved a lot of product.
And Park City kind of, and I moved here.
In the 80s, we there was a lot of product to move.
Yeah, Tom Barberi, the disc jockey, used to say Park City, where adulthood was legalized, but it was a lot more than that.
yeah.
Yeah. You know, it was neat being up there during that period of time. Park City is very, very different now. I worked in a lot of places and did a lot of things with some very interesting people. But I got to that point where I just couldn't do it anymore. You know,
Because
well, this relationship fell apart, right?
Okay.
And or it was on its way to falling apart, and I was delusional about it anyways. I mean, I went to military school when I was 14, and it was an all-boys school, so I was really you know, for lack of a better way of putting it, retarded as far as relationships went and things like that. You know, I was super needy and lonely, and it felt inadequate underneath it all anyways, no matter what I presented outside. And this thing was falling apart, and I came home one day and she says, "Pack your bags, you're going to treatment." And I had a a lot of money stashed in the ceiling and some product and this and that. And I'm like, well, I can't go. I have responsibilities. I had a business on the side. I was doing some computer stuff for people, and it was this little side business I did, which was all BS, right? I just didn't want to go right now because I thought going to treatment meant you'll never use again. It's going to be this magical thing, and suddenly
Your fun periods
the fun
are over.
of life is done, right?
Right.
And I had no perspective of it. And so, and I said, well, she says, how much time do you need? I said, well, give me a couple hours. And so I took that couple hours and I cleaned up some things, and what I did was I took about an 8 ball of cocaine and I made some freebase out of it. And then a guy who I used to party with a lot had gotten sober about 60, 90 days before me. And she and he conspired together to drive me down to what was then Western Institute. And we pulled into the parking lot, and I went in and they made me wait. They said the intake guy was busy. You had to wait a little bit in the waiting room, and so I kept forgetting something out in the car. And I smoked that whole freebase, that whole thing down the way down there. But I kept going out there. I scraped the pipe, and I'd do a few hits in the parking lot, and then come back in. And I'm still thinking, this is it. This is the last time I'm going to use the rest of my life. Wow. And then they interviewed me, and I told them a little bit of the truth, and they said, well, your insurance won't. We won't honor your insurance. You can't come here. And Western Institute at the time was like the primo place, right, to go to treatment. But they referred me to an outpatient program. Now, this was June 13th, 1989. And I went to this outpatient program, and I continued to smoke what I had left on the way to that one. Now, I'm sitting in the back seat of a car with this girlfriend who was as much an addict as I was, and this friend of mine, who is still today a friend of mine, who had just gotten sober. And I can't imagine being the person driving that car with my buddy in the back seat smoking what we smoked, So what I did to him was really unconscionable, but I had no perspective.
Right.
So we went to this place, and I met this woman. Her name was Gail. And she's still involved in the recovery community, Gail Stringham, and very, very good friend of mine today. And she had me she asked me those questions, the very uncomfortable questions about how much I used and how much I drank. And I minimized everything. And at the end of it,
You're probably the first one ever to do that.
Yeah. I minimized all of it. And at the end, she says, well, you are an alcoholic and a drug addict, which, knowing what I know now is like, we don't do that, right? We don't die. She flat out told me, you are. And she gave me a piece of paper to sign, which I still have somewhere folded in a folder, where I signed this piece of paper saying I would go to so many 12-step meetings a week, and I would come to their group twice a week, and I would not drink and I would not use.
Until you got out to the car.
Well, I have no idea why, but I continued to go to that meeting twice a week from June until September. And I continued to dig a deeper hole and getting down to the bottom deeper and deeper and deeper, and continuing to relapse over and over and over. I never went to a 12-step meeting, because I lived in Park City, and all that was up there was AA, and I really just had a problem with cocaine, and and so she'd say, and I'd come in and I would get high in the elevator on the way to group, and she didn't know, because I was very good at doing what I did, And I'd get high in the elevator, and she'd say, when was the last time you got high? And I'd say, well, a few hours ago. I'd lie. I'd minimize. And then I would leave group to use the restroom and get high in the restroom and come back. And she didn't know that either. I told her when I was a year sober, and she no longer lets people go to the restroom when they're in group. I ruined it for everybody, which was great, because that aftercare, they were all pissed at me. But she would ask me, why are you here? And I didn't know. I had made this commitment to go. And I tried to keep my word. I couldn't keep my word about not using, but I showed up to this thing twice a week and continued to dig that bottom. And then sometime in August, the girl left. I hit that emotional bottom, and I was just wrung out. And I finally went to a meeting. And I walked in, and some people were getting a birthday cake for a couple of years sober. And my first thought was, wow, how do you do that? How do you not drink? And these people looked reasonably happy, right? How do you not drink and use
How's that possible?
for 2 years? And my next thought was, well, why would you want to?
Well,
You know, that was a really serious
profound,
thought
yeah,
for
I
me.
mean-
And I had no concept, right? I thought, it's over now. Here I am, you know.
my life's done.
This is the drinking and using was like, you know, sobriety was like the waiting period between drinking and using, having fun, and dying. You know, you don't have
And you look at it kind of in biblical terms. There's BC, that was all the fun, and AD, and not as much fun.
Yeah, that's more deep than I want to get, but
Speaking of deep, we're going to take a short break. You're watching Odyssey House Journals, visiting with Alan Maxwell. We'll be right back. Thanks. And welcome back to Odyssey House Journals. Trip Mitchell, Randall Carlisle. We're visiting with my buddy Alan Maxwell. And we're going back to, all of a sudden, you had been not a model person at your twice a week, causing lots of bladder problems in the future because...
yeah, well, you know, I got to that point finally where I went to the first meeting, and I went every day I could. There was, I think, 6 meetings a week in Park City at the time, and I went every chance I got, but I was smoking pot on the side, and feeling guilty about it, but going anyway.
Sure.
And then I relapsed one more time. I remember that night I called up a hotline for a 12-step program, and this poor girl answered the phone. It's about midnight, and I had just, so recovery 12-step groups kind of talk about this pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization point, right? This place where you're empty.
Right.
And I hit that, and I had relapsed. I had gotten a bunch of cocaine. I cooked it up. I smoked like an 8-ball of cocaine in like 30 minutes.
Jeez.
And I didn't get high. And it was good. It wasn't like it was garbage or anything like that. I mean, I knew what I was doing. And I was like stone cold sober and totally emotionally wrecked. So the magic wasn't working anymore. And I call up this hotline, and this poor girl answers the phone, and she says to me, she says, "You're supposed to call us before you use."
Well, it doesn't work that way.
And I kind of looked at the phone and I said, why? Because I still didn't get it, right? I had called up one of the local treatment centers. A guy who became a good friend of mine was the director at the Haven. And I called up and he answered the phone. This was before I went to that outpatient program, and I said, you know, I'm interested in your program, and what can you tell me about it? And he said, well, stay clean and don't drink and don't use any drugs for 3 days, and then come down and see us. This was their process, right? And then we'll interview you and see if you're appropriate
Right.
for the program. And I looked at the phone, right? I looked at the phone and I said, well, if I could stay clean and sober for 3 days, I wouldn't need
Why do
you
I
for
need
the
the
program. And I hung up on him.
Wow.
I didn't talk to him for a few years till I got sober, and then we ran into each other and became friends.
And you've got how much sobriety now? 30?
Just celebrated 30 years last September.
Wow. And so did you do it through treatment or just going to meetings?
Well, I did that outpatient program, and I did that religiously. It was before they had these formalized IOP programs or any of that stuff. So it was twice a week we'd come down and do a group. And then they encouraged you to go to 12-step programs. And I did. I mean, I when I finally hit that bottom and surrendered, for me, you know, I found that I got fed in the 12-step groups. One of the guys that I used to use and drink with ended up becoming my sponsor, because 2 other guys turned me down to start with.
I don't want you.
Well, I was really needy, and I couldn't sit still, and I couldn't shut up. I was 115 pounds. I had nothing going for me. I found out later, a friend of mine told me, who is still a good friend of mine, that they used to like arrange to sit with me in shifts because I was so toxic.
Jeez.
And I didn't know they were doing that. It was just like somebody else was there and I was talking to them.
Oh,
you know?
hi.
Yeah. But I was a mess. And for the first couple of years, I was pretty miserable. But I did not, you know, it was like, don't drink and don't use no matter what. And I did that. I didn't need a bullet There were, I never thought about killing myself before I got sober, but after I got sober, I ended up getting a handgun, which I decided to carry with me everywhere I went.
Well, if you are 115 pounds with a mouth, not a bad idea to, you know.
Well, it's not something I've never thought of pulling a weapon on anybody. It is a comforting feeling knowing that you can sometimes.
I guess.
But I mean, I went to an AA meeting once. We started a new meeting in Park City. This became a much bigger story, but the truth is it only happened once. We started a 745 attitude adjustment meeting, and I walked in there, and then I pulled the 45 out of my belt and racked the magazine out and emptied the magazine, put the gun on the table, and then we had an AA meeting.
Wow.
They didn't kick me out of the meeting. I played with the bullets during the meeting. I wasn't wrapped very tight.
Jeez.
But I was desperate, and I was willing to do whatever it took to not drink and not use. And so I went to lots of meetings. I worked with my sponsor. I was told to do the steps or die, and so I did. I did the work that I was told to do.
You tell great stories. It's very entertaining. Do you find that to help you in your recovery by sharing stuff like this? I mean, because you're interesting as hell to listen to.
My hope is that somebody will hear what I share and at some level relate to it.
And that's why Alan was nice enough to come on the show.
Yeah.
And I had sent a show out for you to listen to, and because I'm very proud of it. And
I never got it.
And
you
he
said
still
you listened
can.
to it.
I've never seen your show. Sorry, you may have me confused with someone else.
Well, another Alan.
Have another drink, Trip.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, he's our computer expert too, which is ironic. So, be that as may, thank you for coming on. Because
you'll never forgive me now.
well, it's funny because all of a sudden when we start to hear the numbers of the people that are listening, it just became a shock. And what I found is the addiction recovery community in the state of Utah is very large, number one.
Very large.
Number two, very interested in learning more. And that's why we're excited to do this show. And you've been a great guest. And I've heard you speak before. I haven't heard you at a speakers meeting, but...
I spent way too much time talking about what it was like while I was drinking and using. And some of that stuff's entertaining, and I make a little light of it. And you kind of picked up on that before. But the truth is that I got to that point where, we talk about this jumping off place, right? And I was clearly there. It was one way or the other. And luckily for me, I was pushed into this direction of recovery. And I was willing to do whatever it took. In spite of the insanity, sober and using, it's been a long time since I put a gun on the table.
Yeah, I mean, if I sat down at an AA meeting and I saw somebody do that, I don't know what I'd think.
Well, and I would think the same thing today, right? I would like to think that I would, talk to the person.
I think the guy is a whack job, and I'm not sure I want to stay in this AA meeting.
And frankly, the people that saw Alan do this probably thought the same thing.
There were only 4 other people in the room.
Oh, okay.
It was a new
Small
meeting. It was 6:45 in the morning.
Okay.
But agreed, and I had been going to meetings for quite a while. They knew who I was, and I clearly, I wasn't a threat to them whether they knew that or not. I was actually sucking on the gun barrel at night.
Ooh.
And there's a long story associated with me getting the firearm, but the truth is that some of my I'm a very visual person, a very imaginative person, and the idea that somebody else would have to clean up the mess has often, a number of times, prevented me from pulling the trigger. Because I couldn't see myself doing that to someone else. But the pain got bad enough where it was a very real consideration.
How many years sober were you at this time?
That was between the first 2 years.
Okay. So
in that period.
Wow, that's tough. We have unfortunately run out of time, but your story is kind of amazing. I've heard you tell it before, and you're a very compelling storyteller. But the fact is, you've been 30 years without a drink or a drug.
Well, we didn't really touch on the spiritual journey at all. And the truth is that for me, it has been primarily that. And it was, the irony of that is that when I walked into the rooms, that was absolutely not what I was looking for. I was very opposed to that idea. So,
Well, we'll have you back and we'll get some more of your recovery.
okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It was intriguing. I
I
was mesmerized the whole time. So.
That's fantastic, and hopefully you are too. So what do people need to do if they're listening?
Call this number. We're not going to twist your arm and say come to our place, but it's the Odyssey Admissions Office and Information Center, 801-322-3222.
And for those questions, it's a great organization to call. There are a lot of people out there that are really specifically here to help in the state of Utah. We're very lucky. For Randall Carlisle, my buddy Alan Maxwell, and Trip Mitchell, Lee behind the camera, we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.